in this industry. The man is an icon in the business. We said it earlier, one of the founding members of the most influential faction in the history of professional wrestling. And according to many of our listeners, many of our friends, and many of our favorites within the business, one of the best technical wrestlers ever to step in the ring. Let's hear it, ladies and gentlemen, for Tully Blanchard. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm honored to be here with you guys. I don't know if you guys know that I was born in Canada.
What? How do I not know that? Where in Canada were you born?
I was born in Calgary.
Wow. You're just saying that because you're a wrestler.
That's what all wrestlers.
That's the only city he knows.
That used to be what every wrestler said to get booked.
Right.
I'm from Calgary. Right. That's
Stu Hart actually started my dad in wrestling.
Wow.
When my dad was up there playing for the Edmonton Eskimos.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Tully Blanchard's Canadian.
That's amazing.
I just lost my mind here.
So do you still have your citizenship?
No, I don't. I've never really looked at any of that stuff, but I am starting to.
Yeah.
I think that actually citizenship-wise and passport-wise, there was something that the immigration did, like from 1948 to like 1968 or something. If your birthday falls in there, you can still get Canadian citizenship, and which I was born in '54, so I fall in that category.
You should go get that taken care of, and then we'll make all those people that have written those greatest Canadians of all time books, they got to rewrite them because they forgot about Tully.
Totally. That's crazy.
Yeah, let's get Greg Oliver on the phone. He's got to rewrite that book entirely, and it's going to piss Bret Hart off. Really, it's really going to piss off Bret Hart because now he's going to fall further down the list.
Yeah, no kidding. Huh?
Wow.
Tully, I got to ask you, you already mentioned off the top your dad being broken in with Stu Hart. You grew up in this industry unlike many others. I mean, you were literally around the business from the time you were a kid. Your dad obviously was a promoter and a worker, and you were there in the buildings selling drinks and popcorn and programs and grew up in the business. Sweeping,
wow.
Probably putting up the ring, taking it down.
Counting leftover soda water bottles and beer bottles, so you know how much concessions to buy for the next week.
So let me ask you this. When you were doing all that stuff as a kid, from that point until the point where you actually broke in as a professional wrestler, how many of the boys were still around? Like, did they remember you as the kid who was cleaning up, or were those guys all gone by that point?
No, there was a few. I mean, Nick Bockwinkel and
Right.
my dad were partners up in Indianapolis, and Bobo Brazil, and I got to be on some cards with Bobo Brazil there in North Carolina, and there was a number of them that were around. Wahoo McDaniels was my dad's was the first guy he met when he came up to work for Jim Barnett in Indianapolis in 1960 or 61, and my dad met him at the airplane. And so, Wahoo was extremely influential in my career and my performance. I mean, he beat the crap out of me for years.
Did any of those guys give you the extra hard young boy treatment because they remembered you as the guy that was just sort of, sloughing around the buildings and selling programs?
Well, no, because that not so much young boy, but promoter's kid.
Okay, there you go.
I never wanted to be the promoter's kid that was pushed because he was a promoter's kid. I wanted to be pushed because I was deserving of it.
Yeah.
And so I had to do things better than most people so that you would get away from that stereotype, because there was enough promoters' kids that were not very good performers that were getting pushes, and that's all you could ever hear about them. And, then there was guys like Mike Graham, who was just a fabulous performer, and then the Funks, and some of those guys like that, and then Bret Hart and his brothers.
Who?
Who?
We're just kidding.
Don't mind him, Tully.
Tully, I did notice that in that list of names you didn't mention the Gagnes. Why is that?
No, I just didn't think of it. No, nothing directed that way. Greg, actually, I wrestled Greg before, and Greg was a very good performer. And the unfortunate thing for Greg is slender, and it, his physique didn't go with his abilities, and so it was a little bit difficult. And I don't know that because I never worked in that territory, but just outside looking in, the physique didn't go with the ability, and so it was where, my gosh, they had one of the larger territories in the country, most lucrative, and did very, very well. So, I mean, you didn't have to go beat around the country like some of us did.
I mean, when you talk about that stigma, you mentioned it earlier, you never wanted to be looked at as the promoter's kid. There's the quintessential promoter's kid, right? I mean, Greg Gagne he's talked about it. He took ribbings. He took verbal assaults from guys because there were dudes in that locker room who just thought, you don't deserve this spot. And if your dad was anybody else, you would be struggling to get on this show.
Yeah, but Greg could perform.
Totally.
There are some guys that couldn't perform that some of the guys in the South and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But, unlike most promoters' kids, they were always baby faces, and I was a heel. Mm. So that you go down a whole different road, and you had to be able to perform to be the heel. And I think that my record probably speaks for itself. But anyway,
it's pretty good. It's pretty good. A lot of sold out houses.
Speaking of heels, Tully, you were part of arguably the best faction of all time, certainly one of the best ever, one of the most iconic. I was curious to know your thoughts on the many reincarnations of the Four Horsemen. You being an original member, did it ever rub you the wrong way or sour you on the idea that there were so many members coming in and out, or were you happy to see the legacy live on as it continued to change over time?
Well, the legacy didn't live on. Mm-hmm. Okay, what they were trying to do was resurrect the legacy.
Right.
And they couldn't do it. And that's why they had to run so many different people in there trying to rebuild. They were trying to get back to the championship game, and they couldn't do it. Mm. And so then it became Ric Flair's Four Horsemen, which it wasn't at the inception and the start of it. And, and that's my opinion. So, okay. I mean, and we know what people's opinions are. Everybody's got one.
Yeah, I was very curious to hear yours.
You say that line all the time, don't you, Ted?
That's exactly right, I do.
Tully, it's interesting, and I wasn't going to jump to the Four Horsemen right away, but since Dan went there, I want to ask you, and they didn't necessarily say we're inducting Arn, Tully, JJ. They said we're inducting the Four Horsemen.
Right.
And they decided to induct a version of the Horsemen, but not the original Horsemen. Is that correct to you, or is it just a situation where Ole's burned so many bridges that, sorry, that's business? Should they have inducted the Horsemen as a crew, or do you think they got it right because with Barry that was the best grouping?
Well, I think that this was, and I've never said this before, this is probably a way easily to get Arn, me, Barry into the Hall of Fame. Rick was already in the Hall of Fame.
Right, sure.
Without raising a bunch of gaga. That would be one way to look at it. The best group of the Horsemen was the group that got inducted. Mm-hmm. Ole is Ole. He has probably rubbed some people not the right way, but Ole was really only a member of the Four Horsemen when it became a faction for not more than 3 to 6 months. I mean, he was not there very long because they let him go from the company.
So he's the Pete Best of the Four Horsemen. He's the extra
Pardon
beetle.
me?
He's the extra beetle. That's what he is.
Yeah, I mean the nucleus. As long as Rick, Arn, and myself were there,
Right.
the other one didn't make any difference because we were successful with Luger, and then Barry is probably one of the all-time greatest performers that the business has ever seen.
Absolutely.
As Dusty said in his induction commentary, and I mean it was awesome. I mean it changed the dynamics of the Horsemen because I became the tag team partner instead of the second single.
Mm-hmm. Every professional wrestler, when they look back at their career, I would imagine that there is a match, a program, a feud that stands out to them and says, that's really what made me in the eyes of the people. That's really what made me synonymous with this business. When you look back at your career, what was that match, that program, that feud that really elevated you and made you realize either then at the time or looking back, I've made it, man. I really arrived in this business.
Well, I don't know that I ever got to the point that I've made it or I've accomplished it, because if I would have flunking one drug test would not have got me out of the wrestling business.
Well,
because there are many people have flunked more than one drug test and they still go to the ring and perform. Different setting, but as I was on an interview earlier in the week for somebody somewhere else, and I forget what the station was.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, my feuds with Wahoo McDaniels were phenomenal.
Yes.
My feud with Terry Funk, when I took a hammer and almost ripped his ear off, was for Southwest Championship Wrestling, was phenomenal. Nobody has ever wrestled Dusty Rhodes as many times as I have and not killed their career.
That's an excellent point, because you're down every night when you're working with Dusty.
Okay. The I Quit match is arguably the greatest cage match of all time.
Yeah.
And may only be superseded by The Undertaker and Triple H at WrestleMania, because that thing was pretty phenomenal.
Mm.
And, and then I had a series of matches with Steamboat when to go to Starrcade 84 when Crockett's business was not good. And Ricky Steamboat and I wrestled 4 times, 20 minutes time limit, 30-minute time limit, 45-minute time limit, 50-minute time limit, and then Starrcade was an hour time limit.
Unbelievable.
And the Greensboro Coliseum match, I mean, I'm not saying I get all the credit, but we were part of the package that took, when I first went in, not first went in, but when I came to be a main eventer, was, 1,500 people. And in 6 months, it was sold out when Wahoo and I wrestled Flair and Mulligan in an Indian strap match and a bull rope match. And then I started with Steamboat right after that to go up to Thanksgiving for Starrcade.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I've had a number of programs and matches that have gone on, and as you said, most people only have one. They don't have several. They don't have a number of different things to get that in.
Oh, well said.
And these guys pointed it out to me, so I'm just repeating it. But in my 13-year career, there's some pretty strong stuff in there program-wise with superstars, and that's not even talking about the tag team stuff with Arn. And then when we went to the WWE against Demolition, and I can promise you, there's the couple matches that we had with Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels, you'd be hard pressed to have a match better than some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned earlier, and you're alluding to that era right now with the Brain Busters working for Vince. And you mentioned earlier the one failed drug test, and then you were gone. And I believe, if memory serves, that was '89 when that happened. And I think it was right before the Survivor Series, because I remember Bobby Heenan replacing you in the Survivor Series match when you were gone from the company. And you said you said it yourself. A lot of guys have failed the drug test and come back. Why was the door not reopened for Tully Blanchard? Because we know that after you left, Arn Anderson left soon thereafter. I don't know if Arn left of his own accord or they just said, look, we got nothing for you.
The situation was this.
Yeah.
Okay? And you guys are hearing it from the horse's mouth. Arn and I had negotiated a deal to put the Four Horsemen back together, and they were going to pay he and I $750,000 over 3 years each. And so we had given our notice, and we were going to, Survivor Series was going to be the end of the deal. And so Arn was honoring his contract, and when I flunked the drug test and WWE sent me home, there was only 22 days left before Survivor Series, and I didn't think that WCW wouldn't honor their side of the agreement, especially since they didn't have a drug policy, and I knew what everybody at that company did. And so I mean, it's not crazy, but the situation was they reneged on their deal to me, and so I got furious, because you don't haphazardly, I'd gone through drug tests with the WWE for a year and a half. You don't arbitrarily go snort cocaine when you know you get randomly drug tested and you're worried about the outcome.
Right.
You
well
follow
said.
me?
Yeah.
And so it was a done deal. Then when WCW reneged on the deal with me, that's when my life changed. The night that Flair called me and told me that they had reneged on the deal. Now I'm 35 years old, and I'm laying in my bed unemployed. One day I'm a world champion. I'm making hundreds of thousands of dollars, and going back to reform the Four Horsemen and save that company, and now I'm employed.
Wow, blink of an eye.
And that is the night that I met Christ. 4:03 in the morning, I said, Jesus, take over my life, and my life was transformed and changed at that moment. That was 23 years ago this coming November. Wow. And that's what I've been doing. Now, the biggest reason that I probably didn't push to get back in the wrestling business is because I was too busy working on my relationship with God, because it was kind of neat waking up sober.
So Tully, let me ask.
I haven't done that in quite a while.
Let me ask you this: in all of those years that you were doing all of that partying, what's the most you ever did in one night?
Tid wants to know, because he wants to know if you've set the bar high enough for him.
I can promise you the bar's pretty high.
Are we talking like Elton John high, or
Charlie Sheen high?
Yeah.
Just my nature to be the best. I wanted to be able to be the best and do the most, and all that kind of stuff. So
maybe we've got to take a road trip, and then Tully can give you those figures like off air.
There you go.
And then you can up your quantities. And then you too can find Christ, and Tully will save your life.
That'd be awesome.
Tully, we've only got about 30 seconds left, and I'm really disappointed that we're short on time this week, because
we got to get him back.
I know.
Well, we'll just have to do it again then.
We do have to do this again. I wanted to ask you about your relationship with Magnum TA, and I wanted to ask you about JBL, and I wanted to ask you so many different things. But quickly, before we say goodnight, you've been very generous with your time. You mentioned that you were saved and you gave your life to Christ. I know that still to this day you preach. You're heavily involved with your ministry. Please, in the last few moments that we have here, just talk to us a little bit about your ministry and what that's like.
Well, I when I first got out of wrestling, I went through a year and 14 months of unemployment, and I lost everything, and I learned how to depend on God. and that's a great story in itself. And I know we got 30 seconds. And then I spoke in churches for about 4 years, and then in 1994 I went predominantly into prisons. I've been in prisons all across this country, in many of the foreign countries, and that's what I've been doing, taking hope to hopeless people.